The gunshot that echoed through the night sent Olivia Turner diving behind the water trough outside the Mineral Park saloon, her heart hammering against her ribs as the acrid smell of gunpowder filled the Arizona Territory air. It was August of 1882, and she had been in this dusty mining town for exactly 3 weeks, 3 weeks too long if anyone had asked her opinion on the matter. But nobody asked women much of anything out here, especially not women who arrived alone on the afternoon stage with nothing but a carpetbag and a letter from a dead aunt she had never met. The shooting stopped as quickly as it had started, leaving behind an eerie silence broken only by the tinkling piano music that resumed inside the saloon, as if violence was just another part of the evening entertainment. Olivia pressed her back against the rough wooden slats of the building, waiting for her breathing to steady before she dared to peek around the corner. The street was empty now except for a few horses tied to the hitching posts, and the usual collection of drunks who had stumbled out of various establishments to see what the commotion was about. She had been on her way back to the boarding house where she rented a small room on the second floor, the one with the window that looked out over the main street and let in too much dust no matter how many times she tried to seal the cracks with old newspaper. Her job at the general store ended at 7 in the evening, and she usually made this walk without incident, but tonight had proven different. She stood up slowly, brushing the dirt from her dark blue skirt with hands that still trembled slightly. The dress was one of only 3 she owned, and she could not afford to ruin it. Her aunt's letter had promised her a small inheritance, a modest house on the edge of town that she could sell or live in as she pleased. What the letter had not mentioned was that the house was little more than a shack with a leaking roof, or that the lawyer handling the estate would take most of the money in fees, leaving her with barely enough to survive for a month. That was why she had taken the job at the store, weighing out flour and sugar for miners and their families, listening to their complaints about the heat and the dust and the diminishing silver yields from the surrounding mines. The boarding house was run by a widow named Mrs. Crawford, who had a face like sun-dried leather and a heart that occasionally showed glimpses of softness beneath layers of frontier pragmatism. Olivia climbed the narrow stairs to her room, lit the oil lamp on the small table by the window, and sat down on the edge of the thin mattress that served as her bed. Through the window, she could see the stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky, bright and sharp in a way they never had been back in Boston. She had left Massachusetts 6 months ago after her father died, leaving behind debts that swallowed everything the family had owned. Her mother had passed when Olivia was 12, and with no siblings or other relatives willing to take her in, the letter from her aunt's lawyer had seemed like Providence itself. Sleep did not come easily that night. The heat was oppressive even after the sun went down, and somewhere down the street, a dog barked incessantly until someone finally yelled at it to shut up. Olivia lay on top of the thin blanket in her chemise, watching the shadows on the ceiling and thinking about the life she had imagined for herself when she was younger. She had wanted to be a teacher, had even attended a year of normal school before her father's business collapsed and took all their money with it. Now she measured out dried beans and made small talk with weather-beaten prospectors who smelled of sweat and desperation. The next morning arrived with the same relentless sunshine that characterized every morning in Mineral Park. Olivia dressed carefully, pinning her dark brown hair into a neat bun at the nape of her neck and splashing water from the wash basin on her face. The general store opened at 8, and Mr. Hendricks, the owner, did not tolerate lateness. He was a round man with mutton chops that seemed to have a life of their own, and he ran his establishment with the precision of a military operation. Olivia had learned quickly that he valued efficiency over friendliness, though he paid her fairly, and had never made any of the unwanted advances some of the other women in town had warned her about. The morning passed in its usual rhythm of customers coming and going, most of them men from the mines who needed tobacco or coffee, or the occasional stick of candy for a child waiting at home. Around noon, the door opened and a tall man walked in, and Olivia found herself staring despite her best intentions. He wore dusty denim pants and a faded blue shirt, a brown hat pulled low over his eyes, and when he removed it as he entered, she saw hair the color of wheat at harvest time. His face was weathered in the way of men who spent their lives outdoors, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he was not smiling now. "Help you with something?" Olivia asked, maintaining the professional tone Mr. Hendricks had instructed her to use with all customers. The man nodded, his eyes meeting hers for a brief moment before glancing away. "Need to stock up on supplies, heading out to check on the cattle for a few weeks." She had not known there were cattle ranches near Mineral Park. Most of the land she had seen was too arid and unforgiving for much beyond mining and the occasional hardy crop. But she simply nodded and pulled out the ledger where they kept track of large orders. "What do you need?" He listed items methodically: coffee, flour, beans, salt pork, ammunition for his rifle, and she wrote each one down in her careful script. His voice was low and pleasant, with a slight drawl that marked him as someone from further south, maybe Texas or Oklahoma Territory. When she had finished writing, she began pulling the items from the shelves, weighing and measuring as required. He watched her work with an intensity that made her self-conscious, and she found herself checking twice that she had the measurements right. "You are new in town," he said after a while, and it was not quite a question. "I arrived about 3 weeks ago." She did not elaborate, had learned that the less people knew about her circumstances, the better. Gossip spread through a town like Mineral Park faster than wildfire through dry brush. Settling in all right, there was genuine curiosity in his voice, not the nosiness she had encountered from some of the other residents. "Well enough," she answered carefully. "It is different from what I am used to." "Where did you come from?" "Boston." He let out a low whistle. "That is quite a journey. What brings you all the way out to the Arizona Territory?" She hesitated, then decided on a version of the truth. "An inheritance from an aunt, though it turned out to be less than I had hoped." He nodded as if he understood about disappointed hopes. "This country has a way of being different from what people expect. Some folks cannot take it and leave on the next stage. Others find something here they did not know they were looking for." Olivia finished wrapping his supplies in brown paper and twine, calculating the total in her head before writing it on a slip of paper. He paid in cash, counting out the bills and coins with hands that were calloused and scarred from hard work. As he gathered his purchases, he paused and looked at her again. "Name is Wesley Branson," he said. "I run a small cattle operation about 10 miles north of here, near the base of the mountains. If you ever need anything, you can get word to me through the livery stable. Old Tom who runs it knows how to find me." "That is kind of you, Mr. Branson. I am Olivia Turner." He tipped his hat to her, a gesture that felt oddly formal and courtly in the dusty confines of the general store. "Miss Turner, I hope the territory treats you well." Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft jingle of the bell that hung above it. Olivia stood for a moment, staring at the space where he had been, wondering why the encounter had left her feeling strangely unsettled. She had talked to dozens of men since arriving in Mineral Park, and none of them had affected her this way. Perhaps it was simply that he had treated her like a person rather than just a shop girl or a curiosity, a woman from back east who did not quite belong. The afternoon brought more customers and more routine, and she pushed thoughts of Wesley Branson from her mind. Mr. Hendricks emerged from the back room where he kept his office and accounts, surveyed the store with his usual critical eye, and gave her a brief nod of approval before disappearing again. It was as close to praise as he ever came. When 7 o'clock finally arrived, Olivia untied her apron, hung it on the hook by the counter, and stepped out into the evening heat. The walk back to the boarding house took her past the assay office, the land office, 2 more saloons, and a restaurant that served questionable food at inflated prices. She had eaten there once and decided that the meager meals Mrs. Crawford provided were preferable despite their monotony. The streets were busier now as men finished their shifts in the mines and descended on the town looking for ways to spend their earnings. Olivia kept her eyes down and walked quickly, having learned that the best way to avoid unwanted attention was to project an air of purposeful determination. At the boarding house, she climbed to her room and changed out of her work dress into something more comfortable, then sat by the window with the book she had been rationing, a volume of Wordsworth's poetry that had belonged to her mother. She read by the fading light until it grew too dim to see the words, then simply sat and watched as night settled over the town. The stars emerged one by one, and she found herself thinking about Wesley Branson again, wondering what his ranch looked like and whether he was lonely out there with only cattle for company. Days turned into weeks, and summer deepened into September, bringing slightly cooler temperatures but no relief from the dust. Olivia fell into the rhythm of her life in Mineral Park, work at the store, simple meals, long evenings in her room reading or watching the street below. She began to recognize the regulars who came into the store, learned their preferences and their stories. There was old Pete, who prospected a claim up in the hills and came to town every Saturday to buy supplies and get drunk, usually in that order. There was Maria, a Mexican woman who bought fabric and thread to make dresses she sold to the saloon girls. There was young Tommy, whose father worked in the stamp mill and who always tried to sneak extra candy when he thought no one was looking. Wesley Branson came back to the store 3 weeks after his first visit, his supplies depleted and his face even more sunburned than before. This time, when he gave his list of needed items, he added, "How have you been, Miss Turner?" "Well enough," she replied, the same answer she had given last time. Then, surprising herself, she added, "The work keeps me busy." "That is good. Idle hands and all that." He watched her measure out coffee beans into a cloth sack. "Have you seen much of the territory beyond the town?" She shook her head. "I have not had much occasion to explore. That is a shame. There is some beautiful country around here if you know where to look, the mountains especially once you get up high enough where the pines grow. I imagine it is quite different from this." She gestured vaguely at the dusty street visible through the store window. "Like another world entirely," he agreed. "The air is cool and smells of pine resin. There are meadows full of wildflowers in the spring, and deer that come down to drink from the streams at dusk." The way he described it made her long to see it, this hidden Arizona that existed beyond the harsh desert landscape she had come to know. "It sounds lovely. Maybe sometime you could see it for yourself. I mean, if you wanted, I could show you some of the prettier spots." Properly chaperoned, of course. Would not want to damage your reputation. The offer caught her off guard, and she felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the temperature. "That is very kind of you, Mr. Branson, but I could not impose on your time that way." "It would not be an imposition. Gets lonely out at the ranch sometimes. Nice to have conversation with someone who does not just moo back at me." He said it with a slight smile that transformed his weathered face, making him look younger and more carefree. Olivia found herself smiling in return despite her usual reserve. "Let me think about it." "Fair enough. Offer stands whenever you are ready." After he left, Mr. Hendricks emerged from the back and gave her a long look. "Wesley Branson is a good man," he said without preamble. "Honest, hardworking, does not drink to excess or gamble away his earnings. Rare qualities out here." "I am sure he is," Olivia said carefully, not wanting to encourage what felt like matchmaking. "Just thought you should know. Young woman like you, alone in the world, could do worse than catching the eye of a man like that." She wanted to protest that she was not trying to catch anyone's eye, that she had come to Mineral Park to claim an inheritance, not to find a husband. But the words died in her throat because the truth was more complicated. The inheritance had been a disappointment, and her job at the store paid barely enough to cover her room and board with nothing left over. She could not save money this way, could not build any kind of future. Eventually, she would likely have to marry or find some other arrangement, and Mr. Hendricks was right that Wesley Branson seemed like a decent man. That night, lying in her narrow bed and listening to the familiar sounds of the boarding house settling around her, Olivia let herself imagine what it might be like to accept his offer. To ride out into the mountains and see the pines and meadows he had described. To sit by a stream and talk to someone who seemed interested in what she had to say. It had been so long since she had done anything purely for enjoyment, since before her father died and the world became a series of survival calculations and grim necessities. The next time Wesley came to town, it was late September, and there was finally a hint of autumn in the air, a slight crispness that made breathing easier. Olivia had thought about his offer during the intervening weeks, had imagined a dozen different ways of bringing it up or declining gracefully. But when he walked into the store and smiled at her, she found herself saying simply, "I have been thinking about your offer to show me some of the territory." His face lit up in a way that made her heart beat a little faster. "Have you now? If the invitation still stands, I would like to accept. Though I confess I have no idea how to ride a horse." "That is no problem at all. I have got a gentle mare that would be perfect for a beginner. How about Sunday? It is your day off, is it not?" She nodded, knowing that Mr. Hendricks kept the store closed on Sundays except for a few hours in the afternoon. "Sunday would be fine. I will pick you up at the boarding house around 8 in the morning. Bring a hat if you have one, something to keep the sun off. And wear something you do not mind getting dusty." After he left, Olivia felt a flutter of excitement mixed with nervousness. She had just agreed to spend a day alone with a man she barely knew, riding into the wilderness outside of town. If her father were still alive, he would have been scandalized. But her father was not alive, and the old rules of Boston society seemed very far away from this dusty Arizona mining town, where survival often mattered more than propriety. Sunday arrived with clear skies and temperatures that promised to be warm but not unbearable. Olivia dressed in her oldest skirt and a simple blouse, pinned her hair back securely, and waited nervously by the front window of the boarding house. Wesley arrived precisely at 8, riding a large sorrel horse and leading a smaller gray mare behind him. He dismounted with easy grace and tied both horses to the hitching post before approaching the door. "Mrs. Crawford intercepted him on the porch, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of his appearance. "Mr. Branson, I understand you are taking Miss Turner out for the day." "Yes, madam. Just going to show her some of the prettier country around here." "See that you have her back before dark, and see that you behave like a gentleman at all times." "You have my word on both counts, Mrs. Crawford." The older woman turned her gaze to Olivia. "You have got your good sense with you, girl." "Yes, madam. See that you keep it close." Then they were outside and Wesley was helping Olivia mount the gray mare, his hands steady and impersonal as he showed her how to hold the reins and sit in the saddle. The horse was indeed gentle, standing patiently while Olivia adjusted to the unfamiliar feeling of being so far off the ground. Wesley swung into his own saddle with practiced ease and looked over at her with an encouraging smile. "Ready, as I will ever be." They rode out of town heading north, and within minutes, the buildings of Mineral Park fell away behind them, replaced by desert landscape dotted with creosote bushes and hardy grasses. The motion of the horse felt strange at first, but Olivia gradually relaxed into the rhythm of it. Wesley kept their pace slow, pointing out various features of the landscape and making sure she was comfortable. "That over there is the mouth of the Surbat Mountains," he said, gesturing to the north. "My ranch is at the base of those foothills. The cattle range up into the canyons where there is more grass and water." "How long have you had the ranch?" "About 4 years now. Bought it from a man who was giving up and heading back east. He had let it run down pretty badly, but I saw the potential. The land is good if you know how to work it, and there is water from a spring that never runs dry even in the hottest summers. You run it by yourself. I've got 2 hands who help with the cattle, Juan and his son Miguel. Good workers, honest men. They live in a small house on the property with Juan's wife. During roundup, I hire a few extra men, but mostly it is just the 3 of us." As they rode further from town, the landscape began to change. The flat desert gave way to rolling hills, and vegetation became more diverse. Olivia spotted plants she did not recognize, strange twisted trees and bushes covered in thorns. Wesley identified them for her: palaverd, ocotillo, kala cactus, century plant. He spoke about the land with obvious affection, pointing out a hawk circling overhead and a lizard sunning itself on a rock. After about an hour, they entered a canyon where the walls rose on either side, and the temperature dropped noticeably. A thin stream ran along the bottom, and cottonwood trees grew along its banks, their leaves already starting to turn yellow. Wesley dismounted and helped Olivia down, then led both horses to the water to drink. "This is one of my favorite spots," he said. "Come up here sometimes when I need to think." Olivia walked to the edge of the stream and knelt down, trailing her fingers in the cool water. It felt miraculous after the dry heat of the town, this ribbon of life running through the desert. "It is beautiful." Wesley stood a few feet away, his hat pushed back on his head. "I thought you might like it. Figured you could use a reminder that the territory is not all dust and hardship. Thank you for bringing me here." They sat in the shade of the cottonwoods for a while, and Wesley unpacked food he had brought: bread, cheese, apples, and a canteen of cool water. They ate in comfortable silence, listening to the gurgle of the stream and the whisper of wind through the leaves. Olivia felt something inside her relax, a tension she had been carrying for so long that she had stopped noticing it was there. "Can I ask you something?" Wesley said after a while. "Of course. Why did you really come to Mineral Park?" "I mean, I know about the inheritance, but there must have been other options. A woman like you, educated, well-spoken, you could have found work back east, maybe as a governess or a teacher." Olivia considered her answer carefully. "Pride, I suppose, and desperation. My father died owing money to half of Boston. I could not stay there with everyone knowing that the Turner family had fallen so far. The letter from the lawyer made it sound like my aunt had left me enough to start over, to build a new life somewhere that I was not the object of pity or gossip. By the time I realized how little there actually was, I had already spent most of my money getting here. So you are stuck. For now, yes. But I am working, saving what I can. Eventually, I will have enough to make a choice about what comes next. Wesley nodded slowly. I understand about starting over. I came out here from Texas after my parents died. Yellow fever took them both within a week of each other. I was 20 years old, and the ranch they had worked their whole lives to build was being seized for debts I did not even know existed. So I took what little I could salvage, headed west, and ended up here. Built something from nothing because I did not have any other choice. How old are you now? Olivia asked, suddenly curious. 28. Been in the territory for 8 years. She did some quick mental calculation. I am 23. You seem older sometimes in your bearing, like you have seen more than your years should hold. Hardship has a way of aging a person. They talked more easily after that, sharing pieces of their histories and finding unexpected commonalities. Both had lost parents young. Both had come west running from failure and looking for a fresh start. Wesley told her about learning to be a rancher through trial and error, about losing cattle to drought and predators, about the satisfaction of watching his herd grow slowly over the years. Olivia talked about Boston, about her mother's death and her father's long decline into despair and debt, about the years she had spent at normal school and her dream of becoming a teacher. You still could, you know, Wesley said. Mineral Park does not have a proper school. Kids just learn what their parents can teach them or nothing at all. You could start one if you had the mind to. With what resources? I have no building, no books, no way to convince parents to send their children to me. You could figure it out. You are smart enough. Maybe talk to the minister at the church, see if they would let you use the building on weekdays. As for books, people back east are always looking for ways to help the frontier. Write some letters, see what you can get donated. The idea took root in her mind, and she found herself thinking about it as they packed up the remains of their meal and remounted the horses. Wesley showed her more of the surrounding country, pointing out his ranch in the distance, a small cluster of buildings against the backdrop of the mountains. They rode through a meadow where late-season wildflowers bloomed in defiant yellows and purples, and he told her that in spring the whole area would be carpeted in blossoms. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon when they finally turned back toward Mineral Park. Olivia's legs ached from the unaccustomed riding, but her heart felt lighter than it had in months. Wesley had been a perfect gentleman all day, keeping a respectful distance while still being warm and engaging. As the buildings of the town came into view, she felt a pang of disappointment that the day was ending. At the boarding house, Wesley helped her dismount and walked her to the door. I hope you enjoyed yourself, he said, his hat in his hands. I did very much. Thank you for showing me all of that. Would you like to do it again sometime? Maybe next Sunday if the weather holds. I would like that. His smile was reward enough for her boldness in accepting so readily. Good. I will see you before then, though. Need to come into town for supplies midweek. She watched him ride away, then turned to find Mrs. Crawford standing in the doorway with an expression that might have been approval. That one is a keeper, the older woman said. Mark my words. Olivia did not respond, but as she climbed the stairs to her room, she allowed herself to hope that maybe Mrs. Crawford was right. The following weeks fell into a new pattern. Wesley came to town regularly for supplies, always stopping to talk with Olivia at the store, and every Sunday they rode out together to explore different parts of the territory. He showed her ancient rock formations where indigenous peoples had left markings centuries ago, meadows where wild horses grazed, and hidden springs that created small oases in the desert. Each excursion deepened their friendship, and Olivia found herself looking forward to Sundays with an anticipation she had not felt about anything in years. October brought cooler weather and the first real relief from the heat. Olivia also took Wesley's suggestion seriously and began making inquiries about starting a school. The minister at the small church was enthusiastic about the idea, offering the use of the building on weekdays and promising to help convince parents to send their children. She wrote letters to schools and organizations back east, requesting donations of books and supplies. The project gave her purpose beyond simply surviving, and she threw herself into it with energy she had forgotten she possessed. Wesley helped however he could, spreading word about the school among the ranching families in the area, and even donating money for supplies. His support meant more to Olivia than she could easily express, and she found herself growing increasingly attached to him. He was patient and kind, with a quiet strength that made her feel safe in a way she had not felt since her father was healthy and her world was secure. One Sunday in late October, they rode further than they had gone before, up into the mountains where pine trees grew thick and the air smelled of resin just as Wesley had described months ago. They stopped in a clearing that overlooked the valley below, and Olivia could see for miles, the desert stretching away in shades of brown and gold, the town of Mineral Park a small cluster of buildings in the distance. "This is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," she said quietly. Wesley stood beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body. "I hoped you would like it. This is my thinking spot when the ranch gets to be too much. Come up here and remember why I stayed in this territory. I am beginning to understand the appeal." They spread a blanket on the ground and sat down to eat the lunch Wesley had packed. The food was simple, as always, but Olivia had come to appreciate the care he took in preparing it, making sure to include things he had learned she particularly enjoyed. As they ate, he asked about her progress with the school, and she told him enthusiastically about the responses she had already received to her letters. Several organizations had promised books and supplies. "You are really going to make this happen," he said, and there was admiration in his voice. "I am certainly going to try. The children here deserve the same opportunities as children anywhere else." After they finished eating, they lay back on the blanket and watched clouds drift across the impossibly blue sky. Olivia felt drowsy in the warm sunshine, lulled by the whisper of wind through the pines. She turned her head to look at Wesley and found him already watching her. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That I am glad you came to Mineral Park. Glad that your inheritance turned out to be less than you hoped, because otherwise you might have left already." Her breath caught in her throat. "Wesley, I am not certain what you mean by that." He propped himself up on one elbow to look down at her. "I think you do. I have been trying to be patient, to give you time to settle in and get to know me. But the truth is that I care for you, Olivia. More than I probably should given how little time we have actually known each other. When I am working on the ranch, I find myself thinking about what you might say about something, or wondering if you would enjoy seeing a particular view. And on Sundays, the whole week feels worthwhile, because I know I will get to spend time with you." Olivia's heart was racing. She had suspected his feelings, had felt her own growing in response, but hearing him say the words out loud made it real in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. "I care for you too," she admitted. "I have tried to be sensible about this, but I cannot seem to help it." "Why would you want to help it?" "Because caring for people makes you vulnerable. Because I have already lost everyone I loved, and I am not sure I could survive losing someone else." Wesley reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I cannot promise you that nothing bad will ever happen. This is a hard country, and life does not come with guarantees. but I can promise that I will do everything in my power to build a good life with you if you will have me. Not right now," he added quickly. "I know it is too soon for that kind of talk, but I needed you to know what I am hoping for, what I am working toward." She sat up, and he did the same, and they faced each other on the blanket. "I do not have anything to bring to a marriage," she said bluntly. "No dowry, no prospects, nothing but myself and the small amount of money I have managed to save. You think I care about that? I want you, Olivia. Your mind, your spirit, the way you look at the world and see possibilities instead of just limitations. The money does not matter. It should matter. I should matter enough that you want someone who can bring something to the partnership." He took her hands in his calloused fingers warm against her skin. "You are bringing everything that matters. I have spent the last 8 years building a ranch and proving that I could survive out here on my own. But surviving is not the same as living, and I was only surviving until you came along." Olivia felt tears prick her eyes, the first she had shed since arriving in the territory. "I am afraid," she whispered. "Of what?" "Of letting myself hope for this, of believing it could actually work out. Then let me do the believing for both of us, at least until you are ready." He released one of her hands to reach up and brush away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "I will wait as long as you need, Olivia. I am not going anywhere." She leaned forward and rested her forehead against his, breathing in the scent of him, sun-warmed cotton and leather and something indefinably him. "Thank you," she said softly. They stayed on the mountain until late afternoon, talking about everything and nothing, making plans for the school and discussing the ranch. Wesley told her about his hopes to expand the herd, to build a larger house to replace the small cabin where he currently lived. Olivia shared her ideas for the curriculum she wanted to teach, the books she wanted to introduce to the children of Mineral Park. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by comfortable silences and occasional touches, a hand on an arm, shoulders brushing together. When they finally rode back to town, the sun was setting in shades of orange and pink that painted the desert in improbable colors. Wesley left her at the boarding house with a promise to see her in a few days, and Olivia climbed to her room feeling like she was floating. She sat by the window as darkness fell, watching stars emerge in the vast sky, and let herself imagine a future that included Wesley Branson and his ranch in the mountains. November brought the first real cold, nights when frost sparkled on the ground in the early morning and breath misted in the air. Olivia officially opened her school in the first week of the month, starting with just 5 students but gaining more each week as word spread. She taught reading, writing, arithmetic, and history in the church building, using the donated books that had begun arriving by mail. The work was exhausting but fulfilling, and she discovered that she had a talent for reaching even the most reluctant students. Wesley continued to visit on Sundays, though they could not always go riding as the weather grew more unpredictable. Sometimes they simply walked around town together, or sat in the parlor of the boarding house under Mrs. Crawford's watchful eye. They talked about their days, their students and his cattle, and the conversations felt like the most natural thing in the world. Olivia felt herself relaxing into the relationship, allowing herself to believe that this might actually work out. In mid-November, Wesley invited her to visit the ranch for the first time. "I want you to see it," he said. "The place I am building, the life I am hoping you will share." She agreed, asking Mrs. Crawford to chaperone. The older woman accepted with alacrity, clearly pleased to be included. They rode out on a Saturday afternoon, and as they crested the final hill, Olivia got her first real look at Wesley's ranch. It was indeed modest, a small cabin for Wesley, a slightly larger house where Juan and his family lived, a barn and several corrals. But the setting was beautiful, nestled against the foothills with the mountains rising behind and a view of the valley spreading out to the south. Juan and his wife Rosa came out to meet them, and Olivia was immediately taken with the warmth of their welcome. Rosa insisted on making coffee and bringing out pastries she had baked that morning, and they all sat around the rough wooden table in Wesley's cabin while he showed them his plans for expansion. He wanted to build a proper house, he explained, with multiple rooms and a real kitchen. He had been saving money and stockpiling materials, and he hoped to start construction in the spring. "This would be your home," he said to Olivia when Mrs. Crawford and Rosa had stepped outside to look at the garden Rosa was planning. "If you say yes eventually. I want you to have a say in how it is built, what rooms it has, where the windows go." Olivia looked around the cabin, seeing past the rough walls and sparse furnishings to the potential underneath. "I would want a large kitchen," she said slowly, "and a room that could serve as a study, somewhere to keep books and prepare lessons, and windows facing east to catch the morning light. Then that is what we will build." His voice was full of quiet satisfaction. They stayed at the ranch until evening, and Wesley grilled steaks over an open fire while Rosa made fried potatoes and vegetables from the garden. The meal was simple but delicious, and Olivia found herself imagining dozens of evenings like this, sitting under the vast sky and sharing food with people she cared about. When it was finally time to leave, Wesley walked her to her horse and held her hand for a long moment. "Thank you for coming today," he said. "Thank you for showing me. I can see why you love it here." December arrived with occasional snow that dusted the ground but never lasted long. The school was thriving now with 12 students ranging from 6 to 14, and Olivia had convinced Mr. Hendricks to let her reduce her hours at the store so she could focus on teaching. Her financial situation was still precarious, but she was managing to save a little each month, building toward a future that looked increasingly like it would include Wesley. On the third Sunday of December, Wesley asked if she would like to go riding despite the cold. She bundled up in her warmest clothes, and they headed out to one of their familiar spots, a canyon with sheltered areas where the wind could not reach. They had done this dozens of times now, but today felt different somehow, charged with an anticipation Olivia could not quite name. They stopped in their usual spot and dismounted, and Wesley built a small fire to ward off the chill. They sat close to it, close to each other, and talked about their weeks. Olivia told him about a breakthrough with one of her students, a boy who had struggled with reading but had suddenly started making rapid progress. Wesley described a difficult birth among his cattle, a calf that had come wrong and required all his skill to save. As the afternoon wore on, the conversation drifted into comfortable silence. Olivia found herself watching Wesley, noticing details she had seen 100 times but somehow felt newly significant, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the strength in his hands, the gentleness in his voice when he spoke about things he cared about. "What are you thinking?" he asked, catching her looking at him. "That I am happy," she said simply. "For the first time in years I am genuinely happy." He reached out and took her hand. "Olivia, I need to tell you something." Her heart began to beat faster. "What is it?" "I love you." "I know it is soon. I know we have only been properly courting for a few months, but I cannot keep it in any longer. I love you, and I want to marry you, and I want to build a life with you here in this territory." The words hung in the air between them, and Olivia felt tears spring to her eyes for the second time since coming to Arizona. But these were tears of joy, not fear. "I love you too," she whispered. "I have been afraid to say it, afraid to jinx it somehow, but I do. I love you, Wesley." He pulled her closer, and she went willingly into his arms. They sat like that for a long time, holding each other by the fire while the wind whispered through the canyon. When they finally pulled apart, Wesley was smiling broader than she had ever seen. "Does that mean you will marry me?" he asked. "Yes," she said, no hesitation, no doubt. "Yes, I will marry you." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. It was Olivia's first real kiss, and it felt like coming home after a long journey. When they broke apart, both were breathless and smiling. "When?" Wesley asked. "Spring," Olivia decided. "After the school term ends. That gives you time to make progress on the house and me time to prepare properly. Spring it is then, though I warn you it is going to be the longest winter of my life." They rode back to town as darkness fell, and Wesley left her at the boarding house with another kiss and a promise to speak with the minister in the morning about planning a wedding. Olivia floated up the stairs to her room and sat by the window, watching the stars emerge and marveling at how completely her life had changed in just a few months. Mrs. Crawford knocked on her door a few minutes later. "I saw the way he looked at you when he left you at the door," the older woman said. "Do I need to start looking for a new tenant?" "Not until spring. We are going to wait a few months." "That is sensible. Gives you time to do things properly." Mrs. Crawford paused, then added, "You have done well for yourself, girl. Wesley Branson is one of the good ones. I know. I feel very fortunate." After Mrs. Crawford left, Olivia tried to write a letter to old friends back in Boston wanting to share her news, but the words would not come. How could she explain this life to people who still lived in the world she had left behind? They would not understand the harsh beauty of the territory, or how a simple rancher had captured her heart completely. Eventually, she gave up and simply sat, watching the stars and thinking about Wesley. The winter passed slowly, as he had predicted. They saw each other every Sunday without fail, and Wesley came to town during the week whenever he could spare the time. He began working on the new house, and Olivia helped with the planning, sketching out rough floor plans on paper and discussing details. They decided on 4 rooms to start: a bedroom, a kitchen, a parlor, and the study Olivia had requested. The construction would continue through the winter and into spring, with Wesley and his 2 ranch hands doing most of the work themselves. Olivia continued teaching, and the school grew to include 15 students. She wrote more letters east, this time requesting help with building a proper schoolhouse, and was overwhelmed by the positive responses she received. It seemed that people back in the civilized world were eager to help educate frontier children, even if it was just by donating money or materials. She started making plans to build in the spring, after her wedding. Christmas came and went quietly. Olivia gave Wesley a new hat she had bought with her precious savings, and he gave her a beautiful silver locket that had belonged to his mother. She put a tiny photograph of him inside that he had commissioned from the traveling photographer who passed through town in November. They spent Christmas Day at the ranch with Juan, Rosa, and their son Miguel, eating a feast Rosa had prepared and exchanging small gifts. It felt like family, Olivia thought. This makeshift group of people who had all come to the territory seeking something better. January brought cold rain that turned the roads to mud and made travel difficult. Olivia saw less of Wesley during those weeks, but they wrote letters that were carried back and forth by anyone making the trip between town and the ranch. His letters were simple but heartfelt, describing his progress on the house and his longing to see her. Hers were longer, full of details about her students and her plans for the school. She found herself rereading his letters multiple times, treasuring the connection they provided. February arrived with clearer weather, and Wesley resumed his regular Sunday visits. The house was taking shape now, the walls up and the roof going on. He brought Olivia out to see it several times, and she walked through the rooms with growing excitement, imagining how they would arrange furniture and where they would put things. The study had windows facing east as she had requested, and she could already picture herself sitting there in the morning light, preparing lessons for her students. In early March, they set a date for the wedding, the first Saturday of May. It would be a simple ceremony at the church with the whole town invited, followed by a celebration at the ranch. Rosa volunteered to make the food, and several of the women from town offered to help with preparations. Olivia had no family to invite, a fact that caused a small pang of sadness, but Wesley's presence seemed to fill that empty space. He was her future now, and that mattered more than her past. As spring approached, Olivia began working on her wedding dress with help from Maria, the woman who made dresses for the saloon girls. They chose a simple design in cream-colored fabric, nothing fancy but beautiful in its simplicity. Maria refused payment, saying it was her wedding gift. Olivia found herself moved by the kindness of the people in Mineral Park, these rough frontier residents who had embraced her as one of their own. The school term ended in late April, and Olivia spent the final weeks teaching intensive lessons and making sure her students would be able to continue their education over the summer. Several of the older students had made remarkable progress, and she felt genuine pride in what they had accomplished together. On the last day, the children surprised her with gifts they had made, drawings and hand-carved items, and a quilt the mothers had secretly pieced together. The week before the wedding passed in a blur of final preparations. Mrs. Crawford helped Olivia pack her few belongings, and Wesley came to town to load them onto his wagon. Most of what she owned fit easily into 2 trunks, a sobering reminder of how little she had brought to this new life. But she was not sad about it. She was leaving behind the past and stepping into a future that held more promise than anything she could have imagined a year ago. The night before the wedding, Olivia could not sleep. She lay in her narrow bed at the boarding house for the last time, watching familiar shadows on the ceiling and thinking about how much had changed. A year ago, she had been in Boston watching her world collapse. 6 months ago, she had arrived in Mineral Park with nothing but disappointed hopes and a determination to survive. And now she was about to marry a man she loved, a man who loved her in return, and build a life in this harsh, beautiful territory. She got up and went to the window, looking out at the street below. It was late, well past midnight, and the town was quiet. The stars overhead were brilliant, scattered across the sky in profusion. She thought about Wesley, wondering if he was also awake and unable to sleep. The thought made her smile. Movement caught her eye, and she looked down to see a figure on horseback riding slowly down the street. Even in the darkness, she recognized Wesley's posture, the way he sat in the saddle. He stopped in front of the boarding house and looked up, and though she could not see his face clearly, she knew he was looking at her window. She raised her hand in a small wave, and he returned it. Then he sat there for a long moment, just looking up at her window, before finally riding away toward the edge of town. Unable to resist, Olivia threw a shawl over her nightgown and slipped quietly down the stairs and out the front door. She walked quickly in the direction Wesley had ridden, keeping to the shadows. She found him at the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open land, sitting on his horse and staring up at the night sky. "Wesley," she called softly. He turned quickly, surprise evident on his face. "Olivia." "What are you doing out here?" I could ask you the same question. Could not sleep, he dismounted and came toward her. No, kept thinking about tomorrow, about how everything is about to change. Having second thoughts, not even close, just impatient. I am ready for tomorrow to be here already, ready to start our life together officially. She smiled and moved closer to him. I saw you from my window, looking up at the boarding house. I could not help myself, wanted to be near you even if I could not actually see you." They stood together in the darkness, and Olivia looked up at the stars. They were magnificent tonight, more than she had ever seen, blazing across the sky in patterns and swirls. "It is beautiful," she said. "It is," Wesley agreed, but when she glanced at him, she found him looking at her, not the sky. She turned to face him fully. "What are you thinking?" He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was soft and full of emotion. "That I spent so many nights looking at those stars, feeling lonely and wondering if I would always be alone. And now here you are, and everything is different. When I look at the stars now, I see your face in every constellation. Your eyes in those bright points of light, your smile in the way they pattern across the sky. You have changed everything for me, Olivia. You have made me believe in the future again." Tears spilled down Olivia's cheeks, and she reached up to touch his face. "Wesley Branson, that is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever said to me." He pulled her close, holding her against his chest. She could feel his heart beating, steady and strong. "I mean every word. I love you more than I have words to express. I love you too. So much that it frightens me sometimes. Do not be frightened. We are going to be happy together, I promise you that." They stood holding each other under the vast Arizona sky, two people who had found each other against all odds in this harsh and beautiful territory. The stars blazed overhead, witnessing their moment, and Olivia thought about what Wesley had said. She looked up at the constellations and realized that he had given them new meaning for her too. She would never look at the night sky again without thinking of this moment, of the man who loved her enough to confess that he saw her face written in the stars. Eventually, Wesley insisted on walking her back to the boarding house. At the door, he kissed her gently and said, "Get some sleep. Tomorrow is our beginning." "Tomorrow," she agreed. She climbed back to her room and fell into bed, and this time sleep came easily. She dreamed of stars and Wesley's face and a house in the mountains where wildflowers bloomed in the spring. The wedding day dawned clear and warm, perfect weather for the beginning of May. Olivia dressed with Mrs. Crawford's help, and the older woman surprised her by producing a simple veil that had belonged to her own mother. "Something borrowed, Mrs. Crawford said gruffly, and Olivia hugged her with tears in her eyes. The ceremony was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon, and by 1 o'clock, the church was already filling with people. It seemed like everyone in Mineral Park had turned out for the wedding, miners and shopkeepers and ranchers from the surrounding area. Olivia was touched by the show of support from the community that had become her home. Wesley stood at the front of the church looking nervous and handsome in new clothes, his hair freshly cut and his face cleanly shaven. When Olivia walked down the aisle with Mr. Hendricks escorting her in the absence of her father, Wesley's face lit up with such obvious joy that several people in the congregation audibly sighed. The minister kept the ceremony simple and straightforward. They exchanged vows in clear voices, promising to love and honor each other through whatever challenges life brought. Wesley slipped a simple gold band on her finger, and she did the same for him. Then the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Wesley kissed her with such enthusiasm that people laughed and cheered. The celebration at the ranch lasted well into the evening. Rosa and the other women had outdone themselves with the food, and there was music and dancing under the open sky. Olivia danced with Wesley, with Mr. Hendricks, with old Pete from the mine, with young Tommy, whose reading had improved so much. She felt surrounded by love and goodwill, and her heart was so full she thought it might burst. As the sun set and the first stars began to appear, Wesley pulled her away from the crowd to a quiet spot behind the barn. "How are you feeling, Mrs. Branson, Mrs. Branson?" she repeated, testing the sound of it. "I like how that sounds, and I am feeling perfectly happy, thank you." "Good. I wanted to give you something." He pulled a small package from his pocket and handed it to her. Inside was a leather-bound journal with blank pages. "For your teaching plans," Wesley explained, "and for recording our life together if you want. I know you like to write, and I thought you might enjoy having a proper place to put your thoughts." "It is perfect, thank you." She stood on her toes to kiss him. "I got you something too, but it is still at the house. I will give it to you later. I look forward to it." They stood together as darkness fell completely and the stars emerged in full glory. Olivia looked up at them and thought about Wesley's words from the night before, about seeing her face in every constellation. She turned to him and said, "Teach me the constellations. I want to know their names and stories." So Wesley pointed them out one by one, the Big Dipper and Cassiopeia and Orion, sharing the myths and legends associated with each pattern of stars. Olivia listened and memorized, adding this knowledge to everything else she had learned since coming to the territory. When he finished, she pointed to a small cluster of stars. "What about those?" "I do not think that group has an official name." "Then we should give it one. That can be the Olivia constellation." He laughed and pulled her close. "And that one over there can be the Wesley constellation. And that bright one there, that can be our constellation, the one that represents both of us together. I like that." He kissed her forehead. "Are you ready to go inside? I mean to our house, our home." The word sent a thrill through her, our home. "Yes, I am ready." They said good night to the remaining guests and walked hand in hand to the new house. Wesley had lit candles inside, and the rooms glowed with warm light. It was sparsely furnished still. They would acquire more pieces gradually, but there was a bed in the bedroom and a table in the kitchen and books already lining the shelves in the study. It was perfect. Olivia gave Wesley his gift, a watch she had saved for months to buy, with their wedding date engraved on the back. He was genuinely touched, examining it carefully and immediately putting it in his pocket. Then they simply stood in the middle of the parlor, holding each other and marveling at the fact that this was real, that they were truly married and beginning their life together. That night, they consummated their marriage with a tenderness and passion that felt like the natural culmination of everything that had come before. Afterward, lying in Wesley's arms in their marriage bed, Olivia felt more content than she had ever felt in her life. This man, this place, this life, it was everything she had not known she needed. The following weeks were a period of adjustment as they learned to live together. Wesley continued working with the cattle, and Olivia began planning for the reopening of school in the fall. She also took over much of the cooking and household management, working with Rosa to learn the skills she had never needed in Boston. It was hard work, but satisfying in a way her previous life had never been. In June, they learned that Olivia was pregnant. The news brought tears of joy from both of them, and Wesley became even more protective and attentive than before. He insisted she rest more, that she not overtax herself with preparations for the school. Olivia tolerated his fussing with good humor, knowing it came from love. The summer passed in a haze of heat and happiness. They worked together to finish furnishing the house, took evening walks to their favorite spots in the mountains, and spent long nights talking about their hopes for the future. Wesley spoke of expanding the ranch further, maybe buying some of the adjacent land that was coming up for sale. Olivia talked about the school and eventually building a proper schoolhouse that could serve the whole region. In August, supporters back east came through with enough money to begin construction on the schoolhouse, and Wesley helped organize the building effort. By September, when school was set to resume, They had a small but serviceable building with desks, a chalkboard, and shelves for books. Olivia taught through the early months of her pregnancy, though she knew she would need to take a break when the baby came. The baby arrived in early March of 1883, a healthy boy with his father's blue eyes and a shock of dark hair. They named him William, after Olivia's father, and Thomas after Wesley's. William Thomas Branson was welcomed into the world with love and joy, and Wesley proved to be a devoted father from the first moment he held his son. Olivia took several months away from teaching to focus on the baby, and in her absence, one of her older students helped keep the younger ones progressing in their lessons. When she returned to teaching in the fall, she brought William with her, and the students doted on him, taking turns helping watch him during their breaks. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch prospered, and Wesley was able to hire another hand to help with the growing herd. The school continued to thrive, gaining students from further and further away as word spread about the quality of education being offered. Olivia and Wesley added a room onto the house to serve as a proper nursery, and they began talking about having more children. Their second child, a daughter they named Charlotte Rose, was born in the spring of 1885. She had Olivia's dark hair and Wesley's easy temperament, and William was thrilled to have a little sister to protect and play with. The house felt full now, with children's laughter echoing through the rooms and the constant pleasant chaos of family life. The years continued to pass, marked by small triumphs and occasional challenges. There was a drought in 1886 that tested the ranch's resources, but Wesley's careful management and the reliable spring saw them through. The school kept growing until Olivia had to hire an assistant teacher to help manage all the students. They added yet another room onto the house, and Wesley built a larger barn to accommodate the expanding herd. In 1888, their third child was born, another boy they named James. By this time, William was 5 and already showing an interest in working with the cattle alongside his father. Charlotte was 3 and already demonstrating her mother's love of books and learning. The family was complete. Wesley and Olivia agreed, 3 healthy children and a life they had built from nothing. One evening in the late summer of 1889, Wesley and Olivia stood outside their house, watching the sun set over the desert they had learned to love. The children were inside being watched by Rosa while Wesley and Olivia took a rare moment alone together. 7 years of marriage had only deepened their love for each other, and they still made time to talk and connect despite the demands of ranching and teaching and raising children. "You ever regret it?" Wesley asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Staying here, marrying me, building this life?" Olivia looked at him in surprise. "Never, not for a single moment. Why would you ask that? I just want to make sure you are happy, that this life is enough for you." She turned to face him fully, taking both his hands in hers. "Wesley Branson, this life is everything to me. You are everything to me. Our children, this ranch, the school, all of it. I am happier than I ever imagined I could be." "Good. Because you have made me the happiest man in the territory, maybe the happiest man anywhere." They stood together as the stars began to emerge, the same stars they had looked at together on the night before their wedding. Olivia thought about that night, about Wesley confessing that he saw her face in every constellation. 7 years later, married with 3 children and a life full of purpose and love, she understood exactly what he had meant. "Look," she said, pointing up at the emerging stars. "There is our constellation, the one we named on our wedding night." Wesley looked up and smiled. "So it is. And it is just as bright as ever. You still see my face when you look at the stars." He pulled her close and kissed her softly. "Every single time. That has never changed and never will." They stood under the vast Arizona sky, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life together in the wilderness. The house behind them held their children, the land around them held their dreams, and the stars above held their love, infinite and eternal. Inside, they could hear the children starting to get restless, and Rosa calling that it was time for baths and bed. Wesley and Olivia shared a smile and went inside together, hand in hand, ready to continue the beautiful ordinary evening of their beautiful ordinary life. A life they had chosen, a life they had built, a life that was exactly what both of them needed. Years continued to unfold in their predictable yet precious pattern. William grew tall and serious, taking after his father in his love of the land and cattle. By the time he was 12, he was a skilled rider and could handle most ranch tasks with minimal supervision. Charlotte proved to be a voracious reader like her mother, and Olivia began training her to help with teaching the younger students at the school. James, the youngest, had a creative spirit that manifested in whittling and drawing, and he spent hours creating small wooden figures and sketching the landscape around him. The ranch expanded significantly over the years. Wesley purchased the adjacent property when it became available, doubling their grazing land. He invested in better breeding stock, improving the quality of his herd, and the Branson Ranch became known throughout the region for producing excellent cattle. Juan's son Miguel took on more responsibilities as he matured, eventually becoming Wesley's full partner in managing the operation. The school evolved as well. By 1895, Olivia had 3 assistant teachers working under her direction, and they were teaching nearly 40 students ranging from beginners to advanced pupils preparing for higher education. Several of her former students had gone on to attend universities back east, and she received letters from them regularly, thanking her for giving them the foundation they needed to succeed. The schoolhouse had been expanded twice to accommodate the growing student body. Mineral Park itself had grown and changed. The mines that had dominated the early economy began to play out, but the town had diversified enough to survive the decline. There were now several churches, a proper hotel, a doctor, and even a small newspaper. The wild frontier atmosphere had mellowed somewhat, though there was still plenty of dust and the occasional excitement. Through all these changes, Wesley and Olivia remained constants in each other's lives. They still took walks together in the evenings when time allowed, still talked for hours about everything and nothing. Wesley still looked at her sometimes with the same wonder he had shown on their wedding day, as if he could not quite believe she was real. Olivia still felt her heart skip a beat when she saw him riding in from checking the cattle, his form silhouetted against the Arizona sky. They faced challenges together, as all couples do. There was the year Charlotte fell seriously ill with pneumonia, and they spent agonizing days wondering if she would recover. There was the time Wesley broke his leg and had to spend months recovering, chafing at his inability to work. There was the drought of 1893 that tested even their reliable spring, forcing difficult decisions about selling off part of the herd. But they weathered each storm together, their partnership growing stronger with each test. In 1896, on a warm May evening, Wesley and Olivia celebrated their 14th wedding anniversary. The children, now 15, 11, and 8, had prepared a special dinner with Rosa's help, and after the meal they presented their parents with gifts they had made themselves. William had carved a beautiful wooden box for his mother to store her teaching materials. Charlotte had written and illustrated a book telling the story of how her parents met, based on what they had told her over the years. James had drawn a detailed portrait of the whole family standing in front of their house. After the children went to bed, Wesley led Olivia outside to their favorite spot behind the barn where they could see the stars clearly. It had become a tradition over the years, this returning to the place where they had stood together so many times throughout their marriage. 14 years, Wesley said, shaking his head in wonder. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I walked into the general store and saw you behind the counter. Other times, it feels like you have been part of my life forever. Both of those things are true, Olivia said. Time is strange that way. You remember that night before our wedding? When you found me here staring at the stars, of course I remember, you told me you saw my face in every constellation. I meant it then, and I mean it now. Maybe even more now than I did then, if that is possible. Olivia leaned against him, fitting perfectly under his arm as she always had. You know what I realized recently? That you saved me, not in some dramatic rescue way, but in the way that really matters. When I came to Mineral Park, I was lost and alone and convinced that I would spend the rest of my life just surviving. You showed me that I could actually live, could be happy, could build something meaningful. We saved each other, Wesley corrected gently. I was existing, not living, before you came along. You gave me purpose beyond just maintaining the ranch. You gave me a family, a real home, a reason to build something that would last beyond my own lifetime. They stood in comfortable silence, looking up at the stars that had witnessed so much of their relationship. The constellations were in different positions than they had been on that spring night 14 years ago, but they were the same stars, constant and eternal. "Papa, Mama, come quick," William's voice called urgently from the house. They hurried inside to find all three children gathered around the window in the parlor, pointing excitedly at the sky. "Look," Charlotte said. "Shooting stars." Indeed, a meteor shower was lighting up the night sky, bright streaks flashing across the darkness. The whole family stood together watching the display, the children exclaiming over each new streak of light. Wesley's hand found Olivia's and squeezed gently, and she squeezed back, a silent communication that needed no words. This was their life, she thought. This family, this home, this moment of shared wonder under an Arizona sky. It was everything she had never known to hope for when she stepped off the stage in Mineral Park all those years ago with nothing but a carpetbag and disappointed dreams. Wesley had been right that first time she met him in the general store when he said that some people found something in the territory they did not know they were looking for. She had found love, purpose, family, and home. She had found herself. The years continued their steady march forward. William married at 21, a sweet girl named Sarah from one of the neighboring ranches, and Wesley helped them build a house on the far edge of the property. Their first grandchild, a boy named Wesley after his grandfather, was born in 1904, bringing tears of joy to both Olivia and Wesley. Charlotte attended a teacher's college in California, then returned to Mineral Park to take over more of the school responsibilities as Olivia gradually reduced her teaching load. James traveled for several years, studying art in San Francisco and Denver, before finally settling back at the ranch and establishing himself as a respected artist whose paintings of Arizona landscapes sold well back east. By 1910, Wesley and Olivia were in their 50s, their hair touched with gray but their love as strong as ever. The ranch was prosperous, run now by William with Wesley in an advisory role. The school had become a regional institution, with Charlotte as the principal and a staff of 6 teachers. Olivia continued to teach part-time, focusing on the advanced students who needed preparation for college. They had 4 grandchildren now, with a 5th on the way, and the house they had built together rang with the sounds of family gatherings every Sunday. Wesley had added a large dining room to accommodate everyone, and Rosa, now elderly but still sharp as ever, supervised the cooking for these events with Charlotte and Sarah's help. One evening in late summer, after a particularly lively Sunday dinner, Wesley and Olivia took their customary walk to their spot behind the barn. Their steps were slower now than they had been in youth, but they still made the journey whenever weather permitted. It was a ritual that had sustained them through nearly 3 decades of marriage, this quiet time together under the stars. "You ever think about that first year?" Olivia asked as they settled into their familiar positions, her leaning against him while they looked up at the sky. "When we were just learning each other, figuring out how to build a life together, I think about it often. We were so young, though we thought we were very mature and worldly at the time." Olivia laughed. "I thought I knew everything about hardship because I had lost my parents and my home. I had no idea what it really meant to build a life from scratch. But we did it. Against all odds, we built something that lasted, something that will continue after we are gone. Do you ever regret not having more adventure, more excitement?" Wesley pulled her closer. "Olivia, every day with you has been an adventure. Maybe not the kind you read about in books, but real and meaningful. Watching you build that school, raising our children, growing old together, that has been the greatest adventure of my life." "Good answer," she said with a smile. Then, more seriously, "I want you to know that if I could go back and choose any life, I would choose this one. Every hardship, every challenge, all of it, because it led me here to you, to this family we made. Even the part where your inheritance turned out to be nearly worthless. Especially that part. Because if I had actually been wealthy, I probably would have left Mineral Park after a few months. I would have missed all of this." They sat in comfortable silence, and Wesley found himself thinking about all the moments that had brought them to this place. Finding her in the general store that first day, her dark hair pinned back and her eyes wary. Bringing her to see the mountains and watching her face light up with wonder. The night before their wedding, when he had ridden to town unable to stay away, and she had found him staring at the stars. The hundreds of ordinary moments that had accumulated into a lifetime, meals shared and conversations held and challenges faced together. "There," Olivia said, pointing upward. "Our constellation, the one we named on our wedding night." Wesley looked up at the cluster of stars they had designated as their own so many years ago, still shining bright. "You still see my face up there?" He turned to look at her, taking in the lines time had etched around her eyes and mouth, the silver threading through her dark hair, the gentle softness that had replaced the sharp edges of youth. "I see you everywhere," he said quietly. "In the stars, in the sunrise, in the faces of our children and grandchildren. You are woven into every part of my life, Olivia. You always have been, from the moment you walked into it." She reached up and touched his face, her hand gentle against his weathered skin. "I love you, Wesley Branson. More today than yesterday, less than tomorrow. I love you too, with everything I am." They kissed, soft and sweet, a kiss that held 30 years of history and devotion. When they pulled apart, both were smiling, and Olivia rested her head on Wesley's shoulder, content to simply be in this moment with this man under these stars. From the house, they could hear the sounds of their family, grandchildren laughing, children talking, the comfortable noise of people who loved each other sharing space. It was the sound of the life they had built, the legacy they would leave behind. Not a legacy of wealth or fame, but of love and family and community. As the stars wheeled slowly overhead in their eternal patterns, Wesley and Olivia sat together in perfect contentment. They had found each other against all odds in the harsh Arizona territory, had built a life and family from nothing but love and determination. And now, In their twilight years, they could look back on what they had created and know that it was good. The night deepened, and eventually they stood up to return to the house. Wesley took Olivia's hand and they walked slowly back, taking their time, savoring these quiet moments together. At the door, Wesley paused and looked back at the stars one more time. "What are you thinking?" Olivia asked. "Just remembering when I told you that I saw your face in every constellation, and being grateful that life brought you to Mineral Park to me. That of all the places you could have ended up, all the men you could have met, somehow we found each other." "It was not chance," Olivia said firmly. "It was meant to be. Some things are written in the stars long before we see them. We were meant to find each other, meant to build this life together." "I believe that," Wesley said. "I truly do." They went inside together, closing the door on the Arizona night. But the stars continued to shine overhead, constant and eternal, holding within their ancient light the story of two people who had loved each other well. The years would continue to pass, as years always do, but the love Wesley and Olivia had built would endure, passed down through their children and grandchildren. A legacy of devotion that had started with a chance meeting in a dusty general store and a confession whispered under a star-filled sky. And on clear nights, when the whole family gathered at the ranch and spilled outside after dinner to enjoy the cool evening air, Wesley and Olivia would point out the constellations to their grandchildren, teaching them the names and stories. And they would always point out the special cluster they had named themselves, explaining that it represented their love story, how two people from different worlds had found each other in the frontier and built something that would last forever. The grandchildren would listen with wide eyes, and some would remember these moments decades later, telling their own children about the great-grandparents who loved each other so much they saw each other's faces in the stars. And the story would live on, long after Wesley and Olivia had passed from this world, a testament to the enduring power of love and the magic that can happen when two people truly find each other. But for now, in this moment, they were still here, still together, still deeply in love after more than 30 years of marriage. They settled into their comfortable bed, the same one they had shared since their wedding night, though they had replaced the mattress several times over the years. Wesley pulled Olivia close, and she nestled against him with the ease of long practice. "Good night, my love," he murmured into her hair. "Good night," she whispered back. And as sleep claimed them both, the stars continued their eternal dance overhead, bearing witness to the love story of Wesley and Olivia Branson, a story that had begun with a glance across a general store counter and had grown into something beautiful and lasting. A story that proved that even in the harsh frontier of the Arizona territory, even against odds that should have been insurmountable, love could not only survive but thrive. Their life together was not a fairy tale. It had no magic spells or impossible adventures. It was instead something better, something real. It was the story of two ordinary people who found each other and chose, every single day, to continue choosing each other. Through hardships and joys, through challenges and triumphs, through youth and middle age and into the gentle twilight of their years, they had remained steadfast partners. The ranch would continue to prosper under William's capable management, eventually passing to Wesley the Younger when his time came. The school would grow into a regional institution of genuine importance, with former students going on to positions of influence throughout the Southwest. Charlotte would run it for decades, maintaining the high standards her mother had established. James's paintings would hang in homes and galleries across the country, bringing the beauty of the Arizona landscape to people who would never see it in person. But more important than any of these accomplishments was the family itself, the web of love and connection that Wesley and Olivia had created and nurtured. Their children had grown into good people, honest and hardworking and kind. Their grandchildren were being raised with the same values. The legacy was not one of wealth or fame, but of character and love, and that was the best legacy of all. In the years to come, when Wesley and Olivia were elderly and their time grew short, they would still make their way outside on clear evenings to look at the stars. Their steps would be slow, and they would need canes for support, but the ritual would continue because it had become essential to who they were as a couple. And Wesley would still look up at the constellations and see Olivia's face in their patterns. And Olivia would still marvel that this good man had loved her so faithfully for so long. When Wesley finally passed away at the age of 73, surrounded by his family in the house he had built, his last words were, "I will find you in the stars, my love." Olivia held his hand and whispered back, "I will be watching for you." And when she joined him 3 years later, having lived a full and meaningful life, the family gathered one last time under the Arizona sky to celebrate her memory. They stood looking up at the stars, at the constellation Wesley and Olivia had claimed as their own so many decades ago, and they told the story of how their grandparents had met and fallen in love. They talked about the night before the wedding when Olivia found Wesley staring at the stars, and he confessed that he saw her face in every constellation. They remembered the love that had sustained two people through all the challenges life could throw at them, the love that had created the family now standing together under the same stars. And as they looked up at that special cluster of stars, at the constellation that represented Wesley and Olivia's love, someone noticed that it seemed to shine just a little brighter than usual. Maybe it was imagination, or maybe it was something more. But in that moment, looking at those bright points of light scattered across the vast Arizona sky, the family could almost see what Wesley had seen, the faces of their grandparents together at last, eternal and unchanging, written in the stars forever. The family would gather every year on the anniversary of Wesley and Olivia's wedding, continuing a tradition that would last for generations. They would share a meal at the ranch, now run by the fourth generation of Bransons, and they would tell the story again. Young children would hear for the first time about the woman from Boston who came to the frontier with nothing, and the cowboy who helped her find everything. They would hear about courtship conducted on horseback rides through the mountains, about a school built from determination and donated books, about a love declared under a star-filled sky. And the story would live on, passed down through the generations, a reminder that love can flourish anywhere, even in the harshest of environments. That two people from different worlds can find common ground and build something beautiful together. That the greatest adventures are not always the ones we read about in books, but the ones we live daily with the people we love. The ranch still stood, expanded and modernized, but retaining the original house Wesley had built for his bride. The school had evolved into a modern educational complex, but a plaque at the entrance honored Olivia Turner Branson, founder, who believed every child deserved access to learning. The family remained in the area, roots running deep into the Arizona soil, connected to the land, and to each other through bonds forged by Wesley and Olivia all those years ago. And on clear nights, when the stars shone bright over the desert, anyone standing in just the right spot behind the barn at the Branson Ranch could almost feel the presence of two people who had loved each other so completely that their devotion had literally changed the sky. They had seen each other's faces in the stars, and somehow, through the power of that love, they had made it real. They had written their story in the heavens, permanent and eternal, a testament to what two people could create when they chose to face life together. This was the legacy of Wesley and Olivia Branson, not measured in acres or dollars, but in love that had endured beyond death, in family that continued to flourish, in a story that would be told as long as the stars continued to shine over the Arizona desert. They had started with nothing but hope and determination, and they had built an empire of love that would never fall. And somewhere, perhaps written in the patterns of stars only they could see, Wesley and Olivia continued their eternal dance, together as they had been in life, as they would be forever in whatever came after. The cowboy and the woman from Boston, united by fate and sustained by choice, their love story complete and perfect, written in the stars for anyone who knew where to look and how to see.